Ruin My Childhood.
Thank you for listening to Ruin My Childhood, the podcast where we decide if some things are better left in the past. I'm Mike.
And I'm Kat.
And what are we talking about today, Kat?
Spider-Man.
I'm really excited about this. It's been 3 years of podcasting, and this is something I've wanted to cover since day one, so I'm very excited.
I don't know how we haven't covered this yet.
I think part of it was because year one of the podcast, Remake Rewind covered Spider-Man, because
How could it not?
Spider-Man Far
With
From Home
you
came
involved?
out. Yeah, well, Spider-Man Far From Home came out during the first year of the podcast, so we decided to separate it a little bit and wait for a moment. And the moment is, this is the 18th anniversary of the movie. 18. This movie's an adult movie now.
Ugh, that
Yep.
is so weird.
It's kind of depressing because I wasn't young when this movie came out. I was 11 going on 12.
That's
so I was
young. You're still a kid.
I'm still a kid, but I was still double digits. So
You
I'm
still looked like an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I did. But to be double digits and have a movie that's double digits old and almost 2 decades old, it feels a little weird. It makes me feel old.
That is weird.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this. This movie, I've probably forgotten more about this movie than most people will ever know about a movie.
I bet there are parts of this movie that are seared into your memory, being an 11, 12-year-old. 2 parts very specifically that are probably seared into your mind.
Are you talking about
2 very perky parts.
Kirsten Dunst's breastises?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
That was an iconic scene.
It was very iconic, and that was very interesting to me and my classmates. We definitely
Very
talked about that scene.
Interesting. Fascinating. It requires some study.
Yes. There's nothing that I don't remember about this movie. I could, even without watching it, I can get you the plot from A to Z. Probably perfect beat for beat.
You
So I'm
probably know all of the lines.
I mean, I couldn't just recite them right now, but once the movie starts going, I could probably get 80+% of it. I'm pretty sure. I've definitely got some impressions that I'm going to do once we get through the movie, but I'm really curious as to what you remember about the movie.
Not a lot. I definitely remember that kiss scene because it was like drilled into our minds via pop culture. Won an MTV Movie Award for Best Kiss.
They made fun of it in Shrek 2.
Do the MTV Movie Awards even exist anymore?
I think they do. They're just not a big deal.
I mean, were they ever really a big deal?
I mean, I watched them every year. I thought they were pretty cool. I liked them better than like the Oscars and Academy Awards because obviously movies that I watched as a kid would be nominated. And the actors actually showed up and seemed interested in it. So I liked the MTV Movie Awards when I was younger.
I think MTV was a lot more important back then.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they still had TLR back then.
Oh, TLR. Yeah, I don't remember a lot about this. I remember that Green Goblin was the villain.
Yep.
James Franco back in the day before we knew that he was a creep. I mean, he's great, but he's a creep.
He is.
And Tobey Maguire's dumb face.
He makes a lot of dumb faces in this movie.
He makes the same dumb face through this entire film. Like, oh my God, I'm Spider-Man. Oh my God, I have a 30-year-old man's body. Oh my God, I have web shooters.
He was
like,
28.
The same face through the whole thing.
Well, what's funny is you're absolutely right about the face. But when you look at all 3 movies, he has 2 faces. He has that wonderment face, and he has this crying trout face.
I thought Two-Face was Batman. But
Yes. I mean, I think we should just really dive into this movie. There's just some things to talk about before we go and watch it and also get to our fans is this movie is huge in pop culture. You know, obviously the MTV Movie Awards you brought up, the year that this movie came out, Jack Black and Sarah Michelle Gellar recreated a bunch of scenes from this movie and made them raunchy. But this movie was huge. It was, at one point, it held the record for the biggest movie opening of all time. It was the first movie ever to break $100 million in the opening weekend.
wow.
Yeah, it was huge. And we've been watching Entourage. We just finished it. We watched the Entourage movie the other day, which was #disappointing.
God.
But he plays Aquaman, and that movie topples Spider-Man as the biggest opening of all time.
Right. I love that they probably picked that because they thought Aquaman's such a lame superhero. They're never going to actually make an Aquaman movie.
Right.
It turns out we have a terrible Aquaman
Almost
movie
20 years
now.
later.
Oh, God.
Well, the other thing that's funny about Entourage, just as a tangent, is they had James Cameron direct Aquaman. James Cameron was originally supposed to direct Spider-Man in like 1995.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was going to be like a hard R. It was going to have Leonardo DiCaprio.
What?
The only thing they kept from James Cameron's script was the webbing, the organic webbing.
Got it.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Do you have any comments from our listeners?
We do. Coffee Cosplay Couture says, all caps, flesh web shooters. Childhood me loved the concept. Current me is so very perplexed by that choice.
That's a good point. A lot of people either love or hate that. Personally, when I think spider, I think spider web. So it kind of makes sense that he would get a spider web superpower.
I think if you're going to get bitten by a radioactive spider and suddenly adopt all of these spidey traits, wouldn't that just be coming from a very different place?
Yeah, but he's a mutant.
Yeah.
He's a mutant.
It's a little weird. I mean, like, everything that randomly starts shooting out of your body in your teens should just be in your pants.
Right. Totally fair. And to be fair to that point, like why some people were perplexed by it was Spider-Man was an engineer. He designed his web shooters. He's designed all kinds of gadgets and contraptions. And
it's like a 25% of the appeal of the character.
yeah, you do take away a very large part of who he is. Somebody who can rival Reed Richards and Tony Stark as a genius. They take away that in
An
this version.
accidental superhero is far less interesting than someone who kind of accidentally is a superhero and then uses their intelligence to take it to the next
supplement
level.
it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. So our friend Cody Leach said, bone saw. There's a fan in the background who has a cardboard saw that they use to pretend to saw their own arm off. Bone saw is great. It's Randy the Macho Man Savage. Bone saw is ready.
I didn't know your voice could do that.
Yeah, I've done that probably 1,000 times in my life.
That was just so random. There's some really random cameos from the sound of this.
Yeah, no, there really are. And we did get a voicemail from a fan, actually a friend of the podcast, Prime.
Spider-Man. What can I say about Spider-Man? By the way, this is Prime. I called in before. But, like, just, how can I make this positive? Knowing that what we got now? What, can I say Tobey Maguire's in it? What, Franco's in it? With great power comes with great responsibility? I don't know. I could ramble on, but, hope you guys have fun watching this movie. Hope you guys have fun. I'll be looking forward to you guys' review.
Way to talk it up, Prime.
Thanks, Prime. With that, I think we should just watch the trailer, give our listeners a peek of what this movie is, and then go watch it and talk about it.
I'm for it.
You're changing. I went through exactly the same thing at your age. On May 3rd.
Not exactly.
You're invited to suit up. With great power comes great responsibility. And swing into action.
That music.
Spider-Man.
You do too much. You're not Superman.
Rated PG-13.
Aww.
I forgot about that music.
There's so much warm fuzzy happening there. That was an exciting time, though. Like, I remember seeing those trailers.
I used to have a VHS with every TV spot on it.
This was huge.
Yeah.
The advertising was massive. It was one of those movies where you're in the theater, you see the trailer, and people clapped every single time.
I remember that. The very first one was that bank scene with the Twin Towers catching a helicopter, which got cut because of 9/11. But I remember the very first little TV spot. All it was Spider-Man turning his head, and then you saw his hand come up. So all you see is like his shoulder, his head, and his hand. And I lost my mind.
Everyone lost their mind. Also, like, the trailers have Don LaFontaine, who did
everything.
Like, literally over 5,000.
In a world.
Yeah, over 5,000 movie trailers. So he's kind of like the voice of our time.
Yeah. Did I tell you about the candy bar thing for this?
No.
So Hershey's was putting on a promotion that you turned in something like 20 candy bar wrappers and you would get a poster. And it was, full-size movie theater poster, really great quality, not like one you would go and buy at Target, like a legit movie poster. There was 3 different ones. and I got all 3, which meant I had to get 60 candy bars. So
Oh my God,
every
Michael.
dollar that I had, I bought a Hershey's candy bar to turn in. I had my friends, family, anybody who bought candy, I asked them to give me the wrappers so I can get all 3. I still have them. I have those posters. They're rolled up in a tube in our closet. But yeah, I had to get 60 candy bars to get all of these. That's how much I wanted this.
is so
I used to have
hardcore.
a book. I'm pretty sure one of my family members took it, but it was a hardcover. It was like the making of. It was like over 100 pages, hardback, pictures of all the promo stuff for it, the design stuff, all the production designs, all the costumes that they didn't use, the concept art, everything. So yeah, I was pretty obsessed with this, and I'm ready to watch it and talk about it.
Jeez. You're like as obsessed with this as most teenage girls were with like boy bands.
Probably more so.
Yeah, probably. More so. All right, let's get into it.
All right, we're back. We watched Spider-Man,
We
and
did.
I've got a lot to talk about. A lot. I do want to preface it and say it's not all warm and fuzzy. There are 3 major complaints that I have about the movie, and I'll bring them up as we talk about it. But on the whole, there was a lot of good things in this movie still.
In the light of day, we see its flaws, and we still love it.
Absolutely. Right off the bat,
The intro.
yes.
The intro feels so warm and fuzzy and nostalgic. And the way they set up this film, I mean, of course, even from the time that we were kids, the opening credits used to be so much longer than they are now. If you have long involved opening credits, it's either a 007 movie or it's kind of like a power move. But most modern superhero movies right off the bat are trying to set the mood for the film. They're trying to get you into the story. Whereas this was kind of an era where you were still getting hyped up by the theater and being encouraged to like settle in, get your snacks, getting the audience excited about the experience of movie going, because it doesn't feel like the movie, but it feels exciting.
It does, and it's you're very right in that it's of its time, because a lot of the movies did this. X-Men had almost an identical opening with like DNA stuff, where this had DNA and webbing. Very similar. And to your point, you're right. Nowadays, we may still get a long intro like this, but normally there's some kind of opening scene that's exciting, and then they sandwich in the opening credits like this, and then go straight to another action kind of beat. Like
Right.
the Mission Impossible movies do that. There's always some really cool stunt, the dum da 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 stuff, and then into the movies. You're right. We don't really get anything like that.
And you know, I do kind of miss that in a way, because back in the day you had a lot more names up on the screen and you had more crew that also got credited right at the beginning, because I think people paid a little bit more attention to who was doing what. And now some of the credits kind of get thrown away at the
Yeah,
end.
I agree.
Especially like with streaming, you don't even get to watch them.
Yeah, you unless you actively push watch credits, you're not watching credits anymore.
Yeah.
So just another thing with the intro, Danny Elfman's score immediately.
I mean, everything Danny Elfman does is gold.
I mean,
but
he's
it feels like Danny Elfman, and Danny Elfman feels like our childhood.
And what's crazy is, though, every Danny Elfman thing is distinctly of the character he's doing. So he did the Batman score in the Tim Burton versions, and it's very obviously Danny Elfman, but sounds like Batman.
Right.
This sounds like Spider-Man, but it's Danny Elfman. And of course he did The Simpsons and Beetlejuice, and went on to do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory a couple years after this. So huge part of our childhood, and that immediately got me pumped. You know what immediately got me unpumped? Deflated?
What?
I didn't like this.
Tobey Maguire's face?
Sure. No, the narration at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, that was weird.
It's weird because it's bookends. It's the very beginning and the very end. They're both corny. They're both like it's almost like breaking the fourth wall in a
To
bad
be
way.
fair, it's a movie about Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's corny, but like this. I'm just gonna read a little bit of it so like our listeners can get a level of
Spider-Man
this.
can be sophisticated.
So it's a Peter Parker voiceover. Who am I? You sure you want to know? The story of my life is not for the faint of heart. If somebody said this is a happy little tale, if somebody told you I was just your average, ordinary, not a care in the world, somebody lied. And it's like, what? And then it goes on to talking about how this story, like every story worth telling, is about a girl. And then it kind of uses that as a segue to show everyone that he's a nerd. And he goes, I wish I was this guy, and it's Flash Thompson. Hell, I'd settle for this guy, and it's like a fat guy eating a donut. Even that guy, and it's like a super nerdy dude. but that's me. And he's like running.
That's me, the 30-year-old chasing after a school bus.
Exactly. And, you know, he gets up on the bus and he immediately gets tripped by somebody and nobody wants to sit next to him, even like the nerdy girl with braces. And like, he's just a loser. And that's something that the Sam Raimi movies do really well in terms of like setting up that how much of a loser Peter Parker is, which it's also a thing I don't like about the Sam Raimi ones, but that's something I think we're going to compare all three versions of the character briefly towards the end of the episode. So I'll bring it up then. But he gets on the bus. We see that he's a loser. They're going on a field trip. And he's actually very excited about the field trip when he gets there.
Bus full of 30-year-olds.
And you're right. They all look super old. And you see the teacher, who actually looks younger than some of the students.
They do.
And then we immediately see that we get a little bit of exposition dump. Willem Dafoe playing Norman Osborn is dropping.
Willem Dafoe with a baby face.
Yeah.
It's weird because it's Willem Dafoe.
I think he looks exactly the same now.
No, he looks significantly younger, but he still has murder face.
Yeah, I feel like he's the kind of person that he's so distinct, but also like just so consistent that you could dump him in any time period and he would fit in, still have that murder face, but there's just something timeless about him.
Timelessly terrifying. Like, do you think his mother pushed him out and was like, whoa, no thanks?
I wonder how big his penis was as a baby.
Oh my God.
Because we know that he has a stunt penis on other movies.
Because his member
It's
is
alarmingly long.
What was the word that was used? Disturbingly large?
Disturbingly or alarming or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It looks weird. I've seen a gif of him dancing around in what looks like the 70s, something experimental and odd, and it is disturbingly large. It kind of looks like those guys who put weights on their thing because they think it's going to make it bigger, but really just kind of stretches it out. Yeah, don't do that.
So this intro, we kind of get a little exposition dump. We find out that James Franco, who plays Harry Osborn, is flunked out of all the private schools. So that's why he's stuck going to public school with Peter. And he's ashamed of being rich. And he forgets his backpack. And this is how Norman and Peter finally meet. Peter Parker talks to Norman. He's like, I've read everything you've ever written. You're a genius. I've written papers on your articles. And Norman Osborn says something along the lines, I'm like, I'm a bit of a scientist myself. And I love that because it's one of my favorite memes right now where people just do stupid stuff and then they just show his face, I'm something of a scientist myself. And like, it's great. This movie is still permeating pop culture in 2020 with memes.
It really is.
So they go to the field trip. They go into this like lab, which doesn't make sense. Like there's this giant microscope.
A lab that... It looks older than it should for the time.
Right.
It's like dated, but like 80s dated.
Yeah, it's weird.
I don't know how.
But then they talk about how it has the largest electron microscope on the eastern seaboard and all this stuff. Like, why is there an electron microscope and a spider exhibit in the same room?
Yeah,
but they start
weird.
talking about how there's 15 genetically super enhanced spiders where they took the best traits of 3 variations of spiders and combined them. And Mary Jane talks to like the scientist and she's like, there's only 14 here.
Points out their gross negligence.
Right. And basically that's how Spider-Man gets bitten is one of the spiders got out.
Some janitor screwing around. Like, how does that happen?
I don't know. And
that doesn't make any sense.
It's weird because the scientist says something along the lines of like, oh, somebody must be working on it. It's like, you think you would know.
Like, what is there to work on?
I don't know.
Like, unless you're the spider wrangler for this film, there's nothing to work on a spider.
Right.
Although, like, I do want to know now how long it took them to paint the spider.
And they imported it from New Zealand and then painted it.
Right. I mean, they're cute. Like, when we see the spider, it's purple and pink, and it's adorable. But, yeah, that might have taken quite a bit of time.
That bite was funny, too, because it's like it zooms in on the spider's face.
You see his cute little face,
Yeah.
and it opens its mouth wide, and then it bites, and you get, like, a sound effect of someone biting into an apple.
And then also, like, a lightning strike kind of thing.
Yeah, it was
weird.
very dramatic. Well, it was very comic booky, which
Yeah.
I kind of appreciated about it. Like, it made me laugh, which was not what they were going for, but it was impactful nonetheless.
One thing before we move too far along, just because I think it's really important to the development of Peter Parker and Harry's relationship and just Harry as a person. They're kind of talking like boys do when they see a pretty girl. Oh, you talk to her. No, you talk to her. And then, Harry decides to do it. But when he goes to talk to Mary Jane, he actually steals this like factoid that I almost said Spider-Man. He's not Spider-Man yet. He uses this factoid that Peter Parker told him about one of the spiders. He says something along the lines of, some spiders change their colors. It's a defense mechanism. Harry's like, why would I want to know that? But then he goes and hits on Mary Jane because she's like really into the spiders. He uses it, and you see Peter like, are you serious, bro? Like he just has like a look on his face.
Despite Harry being kind of a jerk in that way, you do feel sorry for him because he recognizes that he's not that intelligent, and he really doesn't have much going for him other than his dad's money.
Yeah.
He's flunked out of all these schools. He's not intelligent. His best friend, by contrast, is brilliant, and his father knows that. And he's just feeling like he's falling short in every area of his life.
That's fair. And obviously this ties into more of the plot later on because Harry ends up dating Mary Jane, and it's fast forwarding just a little bit. So despite Peter supposedly being the smartest person around, he doesn't get medical care when his hand swells up to like the size of a golf ball, like the little welt on his hand from the spider bite.
It's like obviously an issue.
Yeah, it's gnarly.
It looks like it got blood poisoning.
Yeah, and it never goes away actually. And like even in Spider-Man 3, there's a point where you actually see a scar on his hand where the bite is, and it's still fairly large. It's like a wart size kind of thing by then. But yeah, he doesn't seek medical attention. He feels like he's dying. He stumbles into his house, and his aunt and uncle are like, hey, you want food? Nope, had a bite.
Goes up, has a fever dream.
With skulls and spiders and
was
DNA.
Like tripping out.
Yeah, dude. And what's weird is it does this weird like lightning strike kind of thing, and it jumps to like the Norman Osborn part of the story for a little bit. But yeah, like, dude, you're supposed to be smart. You could have died. Like realistically, his aunt and uncle should have shown up in the next morning, and he's dead on the floor.
Yeah,
that's what should have happened.
That's it. I mean, what should have happened is no one should have let that gosh darn spider out. But here we are.
Right. So we get a little bit of Norman's backstory while Peter's dying and getting his DNA redone. Redone. It's a retrovirus that causes the mutation.
We switched out the curtains and the DNA. It's all very updated.
So we go to Oscorp, and Norman is like giving a tour to like this general, and he's showing him like the Goblin gliders. Like, yeah, the glider's pretty cool. Like, look at that. And then starts talking about his super soldier serum.
Like, here, son, here's what I like to call a goblin glider.
I think he just calls it a glider, but
it's really just like Marty McFly's hoverboard, but bigger
and cooler,
I guess.
But it has weapons. So we find out very quickly. I think it's very well done how they present all this. That obviously he's a scientist and he's into the industrial military complex. And he's about to lose funding because the general likes some other company more and wants to pull his contract and give it to him. So we set up that he has 2 weeks to do a human trial of his super soldier serum, essentially.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah, and so
it takes like 7 years to get through animal trials, and then you have like 14 years of human trials.
Right, it's exactly. So that's where it's like super terrifying. So we get this scene where he comes back to the lab at night, and he has this one doctor who... It's weird that you picked this doctor because the doctor he has help him do the trial on himself is also the doctor that told the general, like, the serum isn't ready. Like, why would you not get one of the other scientists who signed off on it to be the one who administers it to you?
And dude's pretty chill about it. Like, he's like, are you sure? But then he just follows direction.
Yeah, he does. And, like, we do get a sense that Norman's brilliant in this because he understands the serum. He throws out a bunch of jargon and chemical names, and he says,
he's very confident.
Yeah, and he says, give me the blah, 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 blah chemical.
He throws it back, smashes the bottle like a jerk. Like, who's going to clean that up?
Right. Well, and then the
entitled rich people.
Right. So the scientist that's with him, Dr. Strom, says, like, what was that for? And he's like, it improves the catalyst speed when the vapor hits the lungs. So it's like, we get that he's not just the money guy. Like, he is the money and the brains of this operation.
Yeah,
so I think
that's Oscorp.
Yeah, I think it was very well done to set all of that up, and
then they throw it out the window later.
So, and this scene has one of my favorite lines in the entire movie. You know what it is,
yes.
Don't you? Say it.
So he dramatically smashes the bottle. He climbs up on this table that he needs to be strapped into, and has Strom lower these metal arms over him, and as one touches his chest, he goes,
"Ooh, it's cold."
And you can tell it's just Willem Dafoe, but we appreciate seeing it there nonetheless.
I think this is one of the first scenes in the movie where you can really tell it's a Sam Raimi film, because as he's getting the serum and vapor, his eyes turn white, and it's a very typical thing that Sam Raimi did in all of his horror films, having like his actors with white lenses. So it's very obvious that it's a Sam Raimi film at that point, at least for someone like me who watches a lot of Sam Raimi movies.
Because it creates this dramatic effect. Like, people say the eyes are the window to the soul, and when you black them out, you're like, that's not a human.
Yep, and
Get it
he's
away
not
from
anymore.
me.
So
Yeah.
I think it suits the scene very well. Flashback to Spider-Man or Peter Parker. He feels great. He's ripped now. He's got a six-pack. He doesn't need his glasses anymore.
There's this moment in that scene where he's like looking in the mirror, realizing that he has a 30-year-old's buff body. Aunt May's kind of like, hey, you doing good in there? He looks down, like, obviously looking at his junk. He's like, I'm doing great. Like,
Yeah.
he's super impressed
He
with
almost
himself.
gets like a boner looking at himself.
Looking at his Johnson.
Yeah. So he's feeling great. He does this thing where he like runs down the stairs and puts his hand on the banister and one on the wall, and like runs his feet across the wall. And it's just like, that's so disrespectful to your aunt and uncle.
Right,
to, like,
you can't be doing parkour in the kitchen.
And also, this is 2002. Parkour wasn't cool until 2004.
That's true. Back then, it was just people falling to their death.
So we get this whole thing. He's supposed to paint the...
We're going to get, like, angry parkour people.
Oh, they're the French. They'll just run away.
They're going to comment the history of parkour.
Right.
Is it French?
Yeah, parkour's French.
I know nothing about parkour.
Yeah, it's totally French. It sounds like a French word. Parkour.
10-4. I don't know.
So it's weird how fast this movie goes. Like, I think this whole thing is only a couple of days before Uncle Ben dies at most.
Yeah.
Because he has this thing where as he's running out because he's all Spider-Man.
He's all
hormone
jacked
just,
out.
He's jacked. Uncle Ben says, hey, Michelangelo, we're painting the kitchen tonight. Don't be late. So he goes to school. And this is one of the things that bother me about this movie. This is 2 of 3. First one was the narration. 2 of 3. He is sitting at the table. He goes to pick up a fork and he skeets and shoots him
With those flesh webs.
with the flesh webs. He skeets and it's like hits a tray at the next table over that's like 10 feet away. And he's connected to it by his web. So he yanks it back. It hits Flash Thompson. He's covered in food. And he runs away and he's dragging this tray with him behind him, like with 10, 20 feet of webbing. It gets caught on the door. Clack, clack, clack.
Like, the jig is up from that point.
Right. Well, and then he goes and gets attacked by Flash Thompson. And we get this pretty cool scene that shows the spider sense everything slows down. A punch goes by him. He looks left, looks right. Huh.
Stay on your microphone.
I know.
dude.
I did the look left, look right, and then went away. And then he does these like crazy flips and he does dodges and
And there's like a group of 20 kids watching that.
yeah, and he bends like at the ankle, like he's bends almost perpendicular to the floor at the ankle, showing how flexible he is. Then he does a bunch of flips. He punches Flash. He flies like 50 feet. Everybody at Midtown High would know he's Spider-Man.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
It's stupid.
Gripe
You
number
could say
2.
It's stupid.
Yeah. So then he goes and discovers his powers. And I think this shot is actually a really cool shot. He's climbing up the wall, and Danny Elfman's music really kicks in right here. And every time he puts a hand up on the wall, womp, 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 as he's going faster and faster and faster. And then he looks up at the camera, like right down the barrel, screams, woohoo, and then has a ridiculous jumping scene. But when he's climbing up the wall, they did it practically. They had it obviously on the floor, and he was crawling, and they just had the camera at an angle. And it leads to my gripe 3 later on, which we'll get into. But like him climbing up the wall looks so cool, and later on it looks terrible. But he does this really weird jumping thing, and then we get one of the worst scenes in the movie. You know which one it is?
The one where he's like discovering his powers and being incredibly reckless.
Yeah, but it's also like incredibly annoying. Like he's trying to figure out how to do the webs. And
Go
he does,
web.
Go web, go. Fly. Shazam. And rocker fist and everything. And then he eventually like double taps his palm and the web shoots out. He swings across an alley in Queens, hits a wall. That scene broke a stuntman's leg.
Oh my lord, that just makes me angry.
Yeah, so a stuntman broke his leg on a swing.
For that.
For that
scene.
A welder died on this movie.
Oh.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, a welder died making sets for this movie.
Ugh.
Like a basket fell, like a crane fell or something like that,
stupid.
knocked a basket over.
Honestly, you know, I love this industry. there's nothing else I would ever want to do but be an actor and work on films. But anytime something like that happens, like, it's just so stupid.
Right.
Like, we are literally putting stuff together so actors can stand around and make believe while we film it.
Pretend.
Like, it is just so stupid that anyone should get injured or killed
Right.
making a movie.
And so this leads into him coming home. He was late to painting, so the kitchen was already painted. He feels bad, so he decides to take out the trash. And he has this emotional scene. It's the first time he talks to Mary Jane, like, ever in his life. And he's talking about how great she was in a play from when they were like 6 years old. And she's like, first, like, what are you doing out here? Because she came out crying because her dad was yelling at him.
And
so
we hear all their business
You're
because
right.
they're next door neighbors.
Exactly. So
and
she's-
he looks into her bedroom window
right.
every day.
So she's kind of like creeped out a little bit, but then he says this thing that's sweet, but it's still kind of creepy. And she's looking at him like, this is odd. And then Flash Thompson shows up and has the car, and she's like freaking out over the car.
You know what? Hang on. We need a segue here because, one, Peter's kind of creepy
Yep.
about MJ. Like, there are several points in the movie where he's following behind her. Like, maybe they're walking to the same location, but instead of being like, hey, MJ, and like running to catch up, having a real conversation with her like a normal human and a guy who's not super creepy,
Right.
he just kind of tails her and watches her and
does.
spies on her, and he looks in her bedroom window and apparently have lived next door to each other pretty much their entire lives
Right.
and gone to the same school. Like, one, you're a creep. Two, she is probably not that great of a person if she cannot look up from whatever the hell is occupying her life and realize that he exists.
Right.
Like,
And
why would you think that she's
You're right.
worth your
'Cause
time?
she doesn't. She realizes a bunch of things, like in that scene when they're taking out the trash.
Granted, she's got a lot going on,
Right.
but she's also a little self-absorbed. Let's be real.
Well, and to be fair, like, it's Mary Jane had a troubled past with her father, and she was actually a very depressed person, but she put on this facade of being a party girl and peppy and everything. So it is an act, but Peter's falling for the act because when she like gets excited about Flash's car, like, she's not really excited, but he thinks she is, so that makes him need money. And we get this like,
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So we've already had him become Spider-Man. It's been like 24 hours. And then in one night, he decides that what he needs to get MJ's attention is a flashy car. So then he decides he needs to buy a car. Then he decides he needs to get the money for the car right then, and he's flipping through the classifieds. And right below the car ads is an ad for how you can earn $3,000, which is amazingly the exact
number
amount
he
he
needs.
needs for his car, by wrestling.
yep.
So then he doesn't even like take any time to ruminate about this, figure out if he really wants to become a wrestler. He immediately makes himself a little luchador costume
Yep.
and straight up just goes to become a wrestler. Like, it's ridiculous.
It is
That's
ridiculous.
a lot to happen in 48 hours.
Right. And the thing is, what's really weird about this movie is we don't really know how much time happened between his spider bite and Uncle Ben's death, because when he's on his way to the wrestling match, Uncle Ben offers to drive him because he needs to talk to him about something. And they have this like fight. You're not my father. Stop pretending to be my father. Blah, 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 blah. Right. But Uncle Ben mentions, like, you haven't been yourself lately. You're shirking your chores, starting fights, and there's a pattern. It made it seem like this has been going on for a long time.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like it really did go that long.
No.
So, because if that fight came up that quickly and it's from an ad, like, it would have had to have been within a couple of days of
Right.
that newspaper
But
listing.
there has not been that much time between when he's realized that he has these incredible powers and then the time when he's like, okay, enough about that. How do I get laid?
Right.
Like, I think he would be a little more invested in how something new is suddenly shooting out of his wrists.
And especially as a scientist, like someone who's supposed to be like, you'd want to study that.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
So the wrestling scene itself, though, is pretty rad. You get Bruce Campbell, who's Sam Raimi's best friend in real life. He makes a cameo in every movie as a different character.
Aw.
But he actually is the one who gives Spider-Man his name. So he's nerdy. He's not cool. He doesn't know what's cool. So he says his name is the Human Spider. And Bruce Campbell goes, that sucks. Like, and he announces him as Spider-Man. And he goes to fight. And
But then someone else decided later on to make it stupid with a hyphen.
No, it has to be hyphenated.
I think it should be one word. Batman is one word.
Batman is one word. Why is it? Maybe they couldn't for like trademark reasons. I don't know. Because Iron Man just has a space. Iron Man's not hyphenated.
Iron Man. Yeah, I don't know. Spider hyphen man.
Spider Dash Man.
It's just weird.
I don't know. But you get this pretty cool scene. It doesn't make any sense because it's like, this is supposed to be amateur wrestling, but it seems like underground illegal wrestling, but there's an ad for it. So this has to be legal.
The house is packed.
So they go down there, but like he immediately gets hit by like a crowbar and
Right.
a folding chair before he like...
How does this work?
Yeah, before he gets into the fight and
It's
he
like
jumps up.
Thunderdome.
Exactly. And he even says, I didn't sign up for a cage match. But he gets away after getting hit by a chair and a crowbar from being surprised, which, how is he surprised? He has a spider sense.
Right.
Like he didn't see, or he predicted the flash punch coming, so how could he not dodge these? Whatever. But he jumps
Maybe he
up.
was overwhelmed by the crowd.
That makes sense. That's fair. And he still doesn't really know his powers that well. I'll give him
The
that, I
roar
guess.
of the grease paint, the smell of the crowd.
He jumps up on the bars and he starts taunting Bonesaw McGraw, played by Randy the Macho Man Savage.
Oh, and then he's like, that's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
Yeah, that dates the movie a bit.
It's one of the few things that really dates the movie, though.
What's weird is that's his only quip. This Spider-Man's not a very quippy Spider-Man. Like,
Let's be real. This Spider-Man has half of the charm of Spider-Man because we've lost 25% with his lack of real mechanical skills and 25% with his being a smartass.
yeah.
Like, that's so much of the appeal of Spider-Man.
He only has like 2 or 3 jokes. So he has this joke, which he's not even Spider-Man yet.
He's only 50% Spider-Man.
He has a joke when he's fighting, when him and Green Goblin are interacting with J. Jonah Jameson at the same time. He says, like, Mom and Dad are talking. And then he makes like a little smart-ass remark to Mary Jane at one point when he's like, you know who I am, kind of thing. It's weird that that's one of his like 3 quips, homophobic remark.
Yeah, it was an odd choice.
And I mean, he is a teenager in the early 2000s.
But, you
so
know,
that was of the time, actually.
I mean, it is a relief. We do so many of these that age very poorly. And a lot of stuff that's even newer than this that has more, thinly veiled homophobia.
Yeah. So this is the true origin of Spider-Man at this point. It's not the spider bite that creates Spider-Man. It's this event that's about to happen. So he ends up defeating Randy the Macho Man Savage in 2 minutes instead of 3. So the promoter only pays him $100 instead of $3,000.
What a jerk.
And so he gets robbed, and Peter Parker just lets the robber go. The robber ends up killing Uncle Ben. And that's the true origin of Spider-Man. It's right then and there.
Okay, so the true origin of Spider-Man was like, that cop could have straight up, like, saved Uncle Ben's life, but instead they applied no pressure to the bullet wound.
Yeah, that was
Like,
weird.
That was odd.
They were more concerned with crowd control than saving the
were.
actual person's life. Well, then Peter shows up.
They all just let Uncle Ben bleed out.
Well, and then they just let Peter like manipulate the body because he says he's the nephew. Like they don't validate that at all. Maybe he was the guy who shot him and he's trying to like get some evidence off him. Who knows? They didn't do any kind of precautions.
You know, it was just shoddy police work all around, and it is the reason we have the Spider-Man that we do.
Yeah, there's a reason why we need him fighting crime because the cops aren't doing it.
For real.
But yeah, he just leaves and goes to take on the mugger, and you get this scene of him actually swinging for real the first time as he's pursuing the mugger, and this is gripe number 3.
In his little luchador costume.
The CG is unbelievably bad at
It's
this point.
atrocious.
It looks like a video game, not now, but video game of its time cutscene.
Yeah.
And what it's infuriating about it is we saw them do it with him as Peter Parker, no clothing, no costume. Well, no, not no clothing, but no costume, just regular clothing. So you see his face. So they had to do it practically, but for some reason, because he's in a costume, they decide to CG it, and it's kind of that uncanny valley thing. It just looks really bad. And that's gripe number 3. It's like they did it such a good job earlier. Why can't they make him climb up a wall convincingly again?
I don't know. I was distracted by the thought of Spider-Man swinging around with no clothes.
Uncle Ben dies. Peter Parker graduates high school, and he kind of gets a father figure, Norman, at this point. Like, Norman Osborn helps him get an apartment in New York, and he offers Peter a job and says, hey, if you ever need anything, let me know, because Peter Parker says, I want to make it on my own. And the way he makes it on his own is a really badass Spider-Man montage of him, like, saving random civilians.
Right. And this montage is actually really fun. It's a bunch of fight scenes, and they're really well choreographed.
I agree.
But they're more like lighthearted than most of the fight montages we get in other superhero movies, which, you know, is like a sign of its time, and this being much more of a family-focused movie. But they're also really comic booky. The way that they're framed, you don't
how so?
the half-second cuts that you have in the modern
I get what you mean.
fight scenes, like much longer cuts,
And wide.
yeah, and all of them are much wider. So instead of really having something zeroed in on an object that's moving through a space, you get to see the entire space, and it's almost like they were setting each shot up to look like a panel in a comic book, which I really enjoyed about
No,
that.
I agree. When you first said comic booky, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. The MC movies literally take panels and recreate them in life. But I get what you're saying. The cinematography is more.
The style feels
I agree,
like the
'cause, yeah, they're
panels.
very
and
wide
it gives you
shots.
time to absorb it, which to me feels like reading a comic book. I mean, a comic book, you have maybe 6 or 7 panels that are telling what takes place over the span of maybe 30 seconds to a minute. So the format itself takes its time, and the shots, the way they film the fight scenes, they take their time, and it works.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like you said, wide shot. There's a point for that long take where you see Spider-Man jump off of a lamppost, lean back, do like a handspring into a bad guy, kicks him, dodges a guy, does another flip. Like, he takes out like 3 guys in one shot, and you really don't get that very often, other than like the Daredevil show.
Right.
So that's funny. That's something I've never even ever thought about.
I just completely forgot about what the fights look like in this film, and they hold up really well.
No, they do. I think that was a really great point. It's something I've never considered watching this movie, the cinematography, making it more like a comic book. He immediately realizes he can make money off of being Spider-Man for the newspapers.
Right, like wrestling didn't work out too well.
And this is where we meet J. Jonah Jameson, who, in my opinion, played by J.K. Simmons, is arguably the best comic book casting ever. Like,
Yeah.
I put him up there with RDJ as Tony Stark.
It's spot on.
Even more so that it's spot on. Like, it's just, it's perfect. Like, they could not find someone else to do it. They brought him back in the MCU with the third Spider-Man actor. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think you can have a bigger badge of honor than that, to say nobody else can play this character. We're going to bring you back in a different iteration of the character. He played Jim Gordon in the DC movies in between this. That's how iconic to Marvel and Spider-Man J.K. Simmons is
He
now.
does it so well, and it's such a great character.
Oh, it's perfect because he's just the worst. He's the absolute worst. He's mean to his wife. He's mean to his assistant.
But he has journalistic integrity.
Yes. First and foremost, he's a journalist, and he cares about that.
Green Goblin shows up, does a shakedown, and he still doesn't give up his source.
No, he doesn't. And I think that's great, and I think that's iconic to the character, and it's played very, very well. I can't speak highly enough about J.K. Simmons in this role. He has one of my favorite lines, like right before the Green Goblin comes and demands for the name of the photographer. Peter and JJ are kind of arguing about how Spider-Man's being portrayed in the media, and Peter says something along the lines like, "You don't trust anyone. That's your problem." And J.K. Simmons says, "I trust my barber." And it's so good.
And Hank Mardukas.
J.K. Simmons is perfect. Anytime he's in anything, he elevates it.
He's great in Juno. He's great in I Love You Man, where his best friend is Hank Mardukas.
Yeah, he was on a recent episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Probably my favorite episode of the whole series. He's so good at it.
Oh, he's great. What did you think of the casting of Uncle Ben and Aunt May?
Perfect.
Really?
I really like them.
So here's the thing, like I love the casting in the Tom Holland movies. I love Marissa Tomei, Aunt Bay.
Yeah.
Like, she's great, but something about this version of Uncle Ben and Aunt May, it's so warm and fuzzy, and they're so nurturing, and he feels really taken care of at home. And
Yeah.
that's something you don't get from the other movies.
And it's very important to the character because the whole dynamic with Aunt May was that she was old and frail, and there were certain times where he had to choose between being Spider-Man and taking her to a doctor's appointment because she's sick and stuff like that. And he didn't want her to know he's Spider-Man because it would kill her because she's so frail and everything. So yeah, it's really important to kind of have that elderly kind of
But
thing.
I like this version because she isn't just frail. Like, you want to
Right.
take care of her because she's Aunt May and she is old, but she has more agency than
She does.
they usually give elderly characters. And also, it's nice to just see old people in film. Like,
Yeah.
so many times they just get relegated to these dumb throwaway roles, and it's nice to see someone really be integral to the story. And there are just so few opportunities for older actors.
I can't remember his last name. It's Cliff Robertson, I think it is, who played Uncle Ben. He right around this time I read Flowers for Algernon the first time, and they made a movie called Charlie, and he played the titular role Charlie, the man who gets smart after taking the brain enhancement drugs.
It's a weird play.
Yeah. But yeah, he's great. Like, it's funny because I know him as Uncle Ben and I know him from that. But I remember when I watched this movie the first time, I'm like, hey, it's Charlie. But he's great, and he has this emotion. And when he says, with great power comes great responsibility, I believed it. I think I don't necessarily know he's the best actor, but he really sold that.
Yeah, and honestly, everyone knows that tagline.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that.
It kind of bums me out that in both the Andrew Garfield version and the Tom Holland version, they don't say it. Like, they go so far out of the way to not say it. I want to go into some things that date the movie. Because we kind of skipped a little bit. We kind of skipped to the second Green Goblin meeting, but the first one takes place at this like Unity Day festival or something like that, and it's like all the cultures of the world combine and have like a parade and whatnot. Macy Gray. It dates it so much.
Of all people, she's performing.
Right, and we get finally we get the Green Goblin and Spider-Man meeting, and it's over pretty quick. Spider-Man defeats the Green Goblin by yanking wires out of the glider. But one of the things that
Which is just such like a doofy, stupid way for that piece of expensive equipment to get taken out.
It'd be very vulnerable.
Not a very good weapon.
No, but it is a prototype. They do call it a prototype.
Well, there's that,
so
I guess.
It's fair, I guess. What doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't fault, this isn't a gripe, it's just it's kind of hacky, that the cops don't immediately suspect Norman of being the Green Goblin, because surely they would have gone to the Oscorp and found the dead body and investigated that.
Well, they do find the body,
Right.
and they go straight to him and tell him about it.
Right. But you would think, okay, we know there's missing equipment. Hey, there's the missing equipment. Hey, who did the Green Goblin kill? The board members that were going to kick him out of the company.
Right. Which also in and of itself doesn't make any sense. Why would they? So Oscorp gets acquired, and then they decide that they're going to boot him out. Like, why would you kick out the brains, the money? He is Oscorp. Why would you get rid of him?
They just didn't want the power struggle.
It's like, it doesn't make any sense, and it is the sole reason for him becoming Green Goblin.
Right.
Which is kind of sad.
But he was the Green Goblin before because he went and blew up the competitor. And then the competitor decided to, because of the insurance money, blah, 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 it was actually better for them to absorb the other company. So it's like, he was already the Green Goblin, but it's just like, this made him go fully like, I don't care, I'll kill anybody who gets in my way.
Right.
But it never makes sense that the cops don't go for him.
And then for that matter, it doesn't make sense at the end when Spider-Man does kill him, that Harry then comes to Peter, not knowing he's Spider-Man, and makes it clear that he's going to avenge his father's death and kill Spider-Man because he knows that's who killed him. So if he knows what happened, and he knows that Spider-Man killed his dad, and he knows that Spider-Man is a vigilante, how does he not figure out that his dad was being
Involved.
shady?
Yeah.
And is this terrifying Green Goblin creature? Like, how is he really that dumb?
He must be. Well, I mean, yeah, he is. He really is.
That's just like such a sad cop-out that Harry is too stupid to understand what happened.
We obviously need to talk about the alleyway kiss, and then we should really just burn through the ending because it moves really fast after that.
It does.
So you want to tee up that scene, or you want me to tee it up?
You tee it up.
I got you. So we've already talked about how Peter's creepy. He runs into in quotation marks Mary Jane twice. The first time he runs into her at work, like he's like waiting for her to get out of work, because he learns that she works there because his aunt told him. So he goes and finds this girl that he's definitely had like one conversation with, and goes and stalks her at her work.
Yeah.
And then he does it a second time and makes it like awkward. Like, I took 2 buses and a cab and a subway and blah, blah, blah.
It's
to get
all
here.
kinds of problematic.
Yeah, it's super weird. But one of the times where he follows her, he wants to take her to dinner, and she's like, I can't. I've got a date with Harry. Sorry. So he like goes to leave, and he sees bad guys following her. Like, she's about to get mugged. and he kind of lets her go into the alley. Like, he doesn't scream and say, "Hey, Mary Jane, watch out."
Right. Or even just like find an excuse to walk with her.
Right.
Like if someone ran up after me and was following me and they're like, "Hey, those guys are following you," I'm not going to be upset about it.
Right. Yeah. So, like, why didn't he do that? And also, like, even if he went and fought these guys as Peter Parker, she's seen him do flippy flips and punch a guy 50 feet. So, like, she wouldn't think it's that weird. But the only thing I don't like about this scene is you see him putting on the Spider-Man suit and taking off his street clothes, and he's struggling, like, hopping on one foot to pull on a boot and everything. And she's getting her clothes ripped off. She's getting thrown into a window.
Okay, but that's necessary to set up the
wet
kiss
t-shirt scene.
Where she's getting
Oh,
rained.
it's the kiss scene?
It starts raining.
Yeah.
It dramatically in the middle of this, just so that her shirt can be see-through.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's pretty ridiculous.
It's super ridiculous.
It's like, it kind of makes me angry on her behalf.
But it was so iconic.
It was.
And yeah, obviously we already talked about it winning awards, but this was also their least favorite scene to film because Tobey Maguire's sinuses kept filling up with that recycled water from set.
Everything about this scene pisses me off on the behalf of the actors.
Oh, I bet. But it's just an awkward scene because it's like going back to that Green Goblin, J. Jonah Jameson Spider-Man scene. He makes his little joke about trusting his barber and Hank Bardukas, and wall explodes, Green Goblin's there, and then not even a second later, Spider-Man's outside coming up behind the Green Goblin. So how did he do that instantly but couldn't transform to save Mary Jane instantly?
There are just too many instances in this movie where they just make things very convenient or completely gloss over moments that should be a little more well thought out to be so pivotal.
Yeah, I agree. And from here, the movie just kind of rips. Like, they just realize, oh, we need to wrap the movie up. So Green Goblin sets a trap for Spider-Man. It's a burning building. Spider-Man goes into the burning building. We get that iconic scene where he's dodging all the razor bats, and he gets the cut on his arm. And because he has the cut on his arm, Norman figures out that he's Spider-Man. So then he goes and attacks Aunt May, and then he kidnaps Mary Jane.
And it jumps forward several months, too.
Right.
In the span of this.
Yes, yeah, because we go from this festival to Thanksgiving. So, yeah, it's been a while. We've also heard that he's, like, flunked out of classes. So, yeah, there's definitely been some
He's
time.
become a cultural phenomenon as well.
Yeah, because he's got a catchy tune from Subway Singers. But we get to the end of the movie, and this is, I think, a very pivotal thing. We haven't brought up the 9/11 thing yet, but the ending of the movie was completely changed. The montage was completely changed because of 9/11. So
right. It had him catching a helicopter in a web between the two towers.
I remember seeing that trailer when I saw Planet of the Apes a year before this movie came out.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember that and going, oh my God. And this was pre-YouTube. You can find it on YouTube now, but like you couldn't find it for the longest time. So they cut that scene because of 9/11, and they added some stuff here at the end. So, you know, Spider-Man has to decide if he's going to save Mary Jane or the trolley full of kids, but he manages to catch both. And the Green Goblin's just kind of messing with him, punches him a couple times. But then the New Yorkers save them by throwing bricks and garbage. And you got this one, like, very obviously Brooklyn guy, like, mess with one of us, you mess with them all, kind of thing. And that was brought into as a rah, 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 New York is the best.
There was so much patriotism after 9/11.
Yeah, and
it became like a cultural staple for a decade.
Well, this movie literally ends on the American flag. Like, you have these three movies are iconic for at the very end of the movie having like a 3 or 4 minute swinging scene.
Everyone sold out to patriotism.
Yeah, they really did, which I get it. But yeah, so the movie literally ends with this swing. He lands on a flagpole. You see the flag waving beautifully, and then he swings directly into the camera. Really what I want to talk about at the end of the movie, though, is that fight scene, though, once they get off the bridge and they're on like the park. That is one of the gnarliest comic book fights that I've ever seen in a PG-13 movie.
They get messy. There's blood. There's impalement.
Blood, there's impalement. You see him like twitching and writhing around, pinned against a wall from the Goblin Glider into the Green Goblin.
Willem Dafoe's face. Like, there's some scary stuff in there.
Yeah, it's gnarly. Like, he takes a grenade to the face. You see blood flying out of his face. You see glass coming out and scraping his face. And it gets really dark. Like, Green Goblin says, I was going to kill Mary Jane, painlessly, but now you really pissed me off. Like, he talks about how he's going to kill her slowly and it's going to be torture. And then Spider-Man loses it. He sees red and he just starts screaming. He just starts wailing on the Green Goblin and pulling bricks down on him. And it's like, dude, that's brutal.
Yeah,
It's pretty gnarly. I was surprised by that. I'd say that was like the one thing that surprised me watching this movie now versus back then. Like, I just completely forgot how violent the end of this movie was.
I did too, but it was kind of the norm that you would just always kill someone off at the end of a movie.
Yeah, I mean, they still are doing that, and even in the MCU, like, we really haven't had any villains come back.
Yeah.
So that's still a trope, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
But yeah, that's pretty much the movie. Is there anything else you kind of want to bring up before we wrap it up?
The costumes.
Oh,
We haven't talked about the
we
costumes at
haven't.
all.
It is an iconic costume. People like protested the PS4 game for not having the Raimi suit, and then eventually they caved and put it in as like a free add-on like a month or
What
two.
was
after
the reason? Like, wasn't there some weird...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why it wasn't included in the game originally when like super obscure comic book costumes were, but that wasn't. So I really don't know why it wasn't there, but it was a big deal that it wasn't.
The Green Goblin costume just kind of phoned it in.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints that this
It
is
looks like a paintballing costume.
yeah, or a Power Ranger costume is what everyone's on the internet calls
The
it.
only reason that costume is impressive in any way, shape, or form is that it accommodated Willem Dafoe's disturbingly large penis.
They did drastically change the costume because of him for a couple reasons. Willem Dafoe actually did like 90+% of his stunts, so he is obviously very like lithe, slender. So he wanted a costume
you
that
say it for him. So if we're talking about Rebecca Romaine Stamos being lithe and slender, what's that tone of voice sound like?
I can't do it.
Willem Dafoe is just inherently gross.
Yeah, it's weird, but he
Amazing, incredible actor.
He wanted
very
a more
talented.
athletic kind of Green Goblin costume because originally it was going to be more armored. I showed you the video just before we recorded, but originally the Green Goblin was going to have this like latex mask that was animatronic and makeup and practical that looks exactly like the comic book
That's
stuff.
a lot to have on you, though.
Right, and so they ultimately ended up going with just a helmet. Which it makes sense. Like, honestly, like this was supposed to be a prototype for the army. It would make sense that it would be more armored than
The helmet looks like something from the Jetsons.
it does.
It's
It
a little
really looks
cheesy.
corny. Like that. Well, because I mean, the helmet I think he must have made after he stole it because the helmet wasn't part of the prototype test. Like the guy had like goggles and like a almost more like a helmeted hood.
I just like the idea of Osborn after he's already gone off his rocker, like as the Green Goblin, making this suit happen. Like, did he get it 3D printed? Did
I
he
don't know.
have someone make it for him?
Well-
And it just makes me think he had to make it himself, which is just hilarious.
Well, what's weird because like the costume itself is the same one that the test pilot's wearing, but like it's just weird that it would fit the test pilot and somebody who's as oddly proportioned as Willem Dafoe. So, but to the Spider-Man costume, going back to that, super iconic. And it's a big deal for cinema because you look at X-Men that came out just 2 years prior and Blade like a year or two before that.
They chickened out.
They just did black leather. They even make a joke like, what would you prefer, yellow spandex? So Spider-Man having a bright red and blue suit with the big white eyes, raised webbing, like they even took it another level, is a big deal. Like, because of this, we were able to get like a comic book accurate Daredevil, and we started getting more comic book accurate costumes later on with X-Men First Class, a few years after this one.
But those costumes differed from the comic book versions immediately.
Right.
Whereas Spider-Man has stayed, I think, the most similar to the comic book version. Like, most people, if you ask them to draw Spider-Man's costume, they'll give you an approximation
Right.
of it and be pretty accurate. If you ask most people, okay, draw Wolverine's costume, they're not going to know. Like, it's so iconic, you can't not have it in
Yeah,
this
I,
form.
I think definitely with Wolverine, maybe, because he's had a couple different costumes, but any of the other X-Men, no, you probably wouldn't. Beast would be easy, it's just panties.
It's just for panties.
But a little fact about the costume, each one cost about $100,000 for the Spider-Man suit. 4 of them were stolen from set.
Like 4 versions or
4 different suits. So I don't know if they're versions, I just know that 4 Spider-Man costumes were stolen.
That is absurd.
Sony offered $25,000 rewards for them to come back,
Like,
and
what do you
nobody
do
turned it.
with that? Do you sell it on the black market?
Well, you have 4 of them,
The
so
black
one's for formal
Spider-Man
occasions.
market? Would the black Spider-Man market be the Venom market?
No.
Oh, right, because it's a symbiote.
Symbiote. You remember it from our
I
cartoon
did.
episode. But yeah, the costumes were stolen, so that's pretty crazy.
I wonder what nerd out there just has those somewhere.
I don't know. It's weird.
Like, someone's going to die and their grandkids are going to be sorting out their attic. They're going to be like, oh, why do they have 4 of this?
Super weird. Yeah, it's going to come up like somebody finding an old Nazi uniform from a grandparent.
That just seems reckless. Like,
yeah.
Who was...
I don't know.
Who was phoning in on their security job
it's
at the
crazy.
studio?
Maybe somebody just wore it under their regular clothes, like a custodial worker with like a coverall, kind of just wore it over the Spider-Man costume.
You know, well, and there was also that situation with Hugh Jackman on this film where he was supposed to be in it.
Yeah, they were going to have
Wolverine.
an X-Men crossover.
Yeah, they were going to have the crossover right out the gate, and then he was on set. And they pretended that they lost the costume?
I think that's what happened. I think that
that's just weird. Like, I don't know the whole story, but it sounded like he was there and they're like, we can't find the costume. We're so sorry.
Yeah.
And then they're like, you're just going to go home and then we're never going to shoot it. That's
right.
not
It's super weird.
That's not how these contracts work.
I'm pretty sure what happened was...
Did he get on set and then a bunch of bigwigs have a conversation with him in the trailer like, we're going to offer you the helm of this project? Right,
because I think what probably happened, because you would get they would have little cameo things in movies before, and they weren't a big deal. Like, you just had cameos or throwaway lines, like in some of the George Clooney Batman references Superman. You know, so maybe they thought it wasn't going to be a big deal. They thought it would be fun. Hey, Hugh Jackman, why don't you fly out here? We'll throw you in the movie. It'll be fun. Everyone will love it. And then probably like Fox was like, whoa, no. And wouldn't give them access. But I don't know. It's super weird that it even almost happened.
Because isn't that the story? That it was a costume mix-up?
Yeah, all I know is that they didn't have access to it or it was missing. I know they couldn't get the costume that day. And so the cameo was scrapped.
But then, like, it also begs the question of, was there a yellow spandex costume at the very beginning?
Well, we know that there's a yellow spandex suit after the second Solo movie. Because, like, we've actually seen it in a suitcase. So at one point there is, whether it was prior to this or later, who knows, but there is a yellow costume somewhere.
There's just a lot of tomfoolery happening with this studio.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
X-Men's a different studio, too. That was Fox, and this is Sony. So it's even stranger that this almost happened at all. So I've got just a couple facts that, I kind of want to wrap it up. This came out on the 40th anniversary of the comic book, or the 40th year.
Oh, how cute.
So that's pretty cool. At one point, Leonardo DiCaprio was going to do it with James Cameron.
He would have been great.
He was offered it again for this, but he turned it down. He didn't want to play the character for a long time.
Like, the two of them, I would have wanted to watch that version.
Yeah, that could have been good.
That could have been amazing.
Freddie Prinze Jr. was up for it. Chris Klein, Wes Bentley.
No.
Apparently, the studio really wanted Freddie Prinze Jr., and Sam Raimi was like, the only way he'll be in it is when he's like watching it in the theater or something like that. Like, Sam Raimi just did not want that. Sam Raimi was picked because he has, like, at the time had a comic book collection of like 250,000 comic books or something like that.
Nerd cred.
Yeah. So he had that, and that's pretty much it. Eliza Dushku was going to be Mary Jane at one point.
Hot.
She even, the screen test for Tobey Maguire had her in it.
I can't picture her as a redhead, though.
Yeah, that
was
why they
probably the
did it.
deciding factor.
Exactly. Eliza Dushku was almost given the role.
You just said that.
No, not Eliza Dushku. Eliza Cuthbert. Her. I can't remember her first name. Alicia Cuthbert from 24.
Alicia Cuthbert?
Her. Amina Savari. Green Goblin was almost Nick Cage. They offered it to him.
Yikes.
He had a scheduling conflict. At one point, it was going to be Ed Norton.
I feel like Nick Cage shouldn't have been able to pass up the money.
This was 2002, though, so he was doing okay at this time. This was before all of his bankruptcies.
Okay.
Pretty much all I've got for the movie. I think we have to answer the question, did this ruin your childhood?
I remember seeing this about 5 to 10 years ago. Time is kind of a blurry construct right now in the middle of the pandemic. And I remember hating it. I still hate Tobey Maguire in it.
That's fair.
But I like the movie more this time around, and it gave me more of the warm and fuzzy nostalgia that I don't remember having the last time I revisited it.
Interesting.
How about you?
I liked it more than I thought I was going to. just because I love the Tom Holland version so much. And at the time, I liked the Andrew Garfield versions better. When we did it on Remake Rewind, I actually realized in retrospect the Andrew Garfield ones are actually the weaker movies. Even though he was good in the role, I think they were just bad. I don't want to say they're bad movies, but they're not as good as these franchises. I think
they suffered from their editing and from that era of producers having this massive overreach creatively in all of our superhero movies.
Well, and that's why that's why that happened.
Like
was
DC and Marvel both screwed the pooch big time by giving
For a long
way
time.
too much power to producers.
for a very long time they
Which
did
is
that.
probably like not a great thing for an actor to say, but I really stand by directors and writers making the bulk of the decision. And
Yeah, let the creators create.
right, like it makes sense if you're going to have someone at the helm of the project deciding who they want in those roles, but I think like once those people are in place, directors really need to have that creative control.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why Sam Raimi ultimately decided not to do the fourth movie. So, because the studio interfered in the third one and forced him to do Venom, who he really didn't want to do it. So you had to do Venom all in one movie, which you really can't do. Venom should have been a 2-movie arc. So he was
It's how we
forced to
end
do
up
it.
with films that are phoning it in because they're doing it as a means to create the stuff that they really want to create, that they will
Exactly.
have control in.
So yeah, they were supposed to do a fourth one with Sam Raimi. It was supposed to have John Malkovich as the Vulture. It was supposed
That
to have
would've been great.
Anne Hathaway as Catwoman, or Black Cat, not Catwoman. She ended up being Catwoman a few years down the road. But yeah, we were supposed to get all that, and then because they interfered, there was a big argument, and then they still wanted to hold Sam Raimi to his original release schedule when they were fighting for like 6 months about the story.
Yikes.
So he walked.
No wonder.
Yeah, he walked.
Like, there's
And-
no amount of money that can make working in that kind of situation worth it.
Exactly. So he walked, and that's how we got Andrew Garfield, and those movies didn't do very well financially. And now we got Tom Holland, who's incredible. Like, if I'm going to go and watch a Spider-Man movie right now, it's going to be Far From Home or Homecoming.
Right.
Like, those movies are just so easy to watch. Like, I've probably watched Far From Home as many times as I've watched this movie.
Okay, and because, like I said, we only get 50% of Spider-Man in this movie, whereas in Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland versions, you really get the snark, and you see so much better physicality from Tom Holland.
I agree. Oh, even the Andrew Garfield one had him doing more flippy flips and utilizing the web more in combat and stuff like that. So we got more interesting fight scenes in the newer movies, and that's obviously
More
because technology.
distinctively Spider-Man.
Yeah, and that's because we have better technology now, of course. So I don't think that one as much, but
I
I
feel
was
like
surprised
Tobey Maguire phoned it in.
he did. Well,
And we also just didn't really get
Yeah, he
a
got
really
$20 million
Spidey
for this
kinda
movie.
Spider-Man.
yeah, I agree. Like, he only did this because one was for the money. He agreed to do 3 right off the bat, so he can get $20 million for the first movie.
Yikes.
So he got paid a ton. He almost didn't do the second movie because he got hurt filming Seabiscuit, and then they were going to replace him with Jake Gyllenhaal. So it's a pretty interesting story. I ended up really liking it. Like I said, I had 3 major gripes. I said them, but on the whole, I did like it. Like,
It's
I was
enjoyable.
I was surprised at how well the special effects held up after he was in the red and blue costume.
Right.
Because that epic swing at the end of the movie was enough reason to watch the movie.
Yeah.
It was just that last
There's some
40 seconds.
Really terrible CG moments, and then they sandwich it between that kind of technical mastery that still holds
Yeah.
up and looks really good.
I agree. So it was definitely worth watching. I think I will over the next couple weeks watch the second and third movies just to round it out.
Right.
But what are we doing next episode?
We are covering Hercules because
They're doing a live action remake reimagining.
who do you think we're going to get as Hercules?
I think it's going to be a Hemsworth.
Really?
I think it'll be a Hemsworth because of their relationships with Disney.
Oh.
And we
That
know
would be
the
interesting.
Russo brothers are producing it.
But it's just like, okay, how big is it going to be? Because I feel like Aladdin kind of fell flat with audiences.
It still grossed over $1 billion.
Okay, like it made the money, but I just wonder what incentive that gives someone like Chris Hemsworth, who has his pick of anything in the world that he wants to do.
Yeah, I think Chris Hemsworth specifically would probably do it because he hasn't had much box office success outside of the Marvel movies.
And he's got kids.
But yeah, tell our listeners where they can find you on the internets.
I'm all over the interwebs at Katrina Ossity.
Check out her YouTube and check out everything that's MDXpods related and Ruin My Childhood related at Instagram, Facebook, I almost said MySpace, Twitter, all at MDXpods. This movie brought me back to MySpace because my MySpace background was Spider-Man, specifically. Yep. But yeah, check us out on the internet. We're now on Spotify. So
Whoop.
even
Only took
easier to get
3 years
I
to get on
know,
Spotify.
Jesus.
We've arrived, guys. Was that like a technical glitch?
No, it used to be a lot harder. They opened it up a couple months ago to anybody.
Oh, well, that's kind of sad.
Yeah. No, it used to be very, very hard to get on there. But yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.